In statistics, before we use data to make inference or generalizations about a population, we need to know whether the data is coming from an experimental study or an observational study. This is because there are some other things that we need to take into account before we move on into that inference piece. When we talk about an experimental study, by definition, we are doing an experiment if the researcher is attempting to control any aspect of the individuals or the subjects in the sample. The researcher randomly assigns individuals or subjects into the different groups that the experiment has. For example, we have an agriculture agency that divides 100 plots into two different groups. One group is going to receive no pesticides, and the other group receives the pesticides treatment. The crop yields of each plot are measured at the end of the season. So in this experiment, we have two groups. One receives the pesticides, the other one is not receiving any sort of treatment. And at the end of the season, we are going to measure the crop yields for each of the plots and see whether or not receiving the pesticides makes a difference. This is an experiment. We are controlling whether or not the group receives the pesticides. On the other hand, we have observational studies. In an observational study, there is no attempt to control any aspect of the individuals or the subjects in the sample. Typically use it when it is difficult, unethical, or impossible to control factors in the sample. So pretty much when we are doing an observational study, as we are just making an observation of some sort of behavior and making note of that behavior, or making note of that measurement, whatever it is that we are collecting. But we don't have groups. We are not controlling any factor in the study. Is this an observational or an experimental study? We have a large manufacturing firm that is interested in the effect of the temperature of the manufacturing floor on the worker productivity. Over the course of a year, the firm randomly samples its 103 sites and records the temperature and the quantity of items produced on that day. Observational or experimental. So we have the firm. It has a total of 103 sites. So instead of going to all of the sites, they are just randomly selecting some of them. And then they will go in. They are going to record the temperature on that site, and they are recording the quantity of items that were produced on that day. So now you have to think, are we controlling an aspect of this? Are they controlling the temperature? The answer is no. They are not controlling the temperature. They're just going in to the site, recording the temperature that is in that particular site, and recording the quantity of items produced on that day. So because there is nothing being controlled, this is an observational study. Next example. We have a biology student that is interested in the relationship between temperature and germination times for soybeans. The student gets sample seeds from multiple sources and randomly select 180 seeds from them. Then he sets up 3 growing stations, one at 20 degrees Celsius, one at 15 degrees Celsius, and one at 25 degrees Celsius. He divides the seeds into 3 groups of 60 and plants the seeds from each group in a growing station. At the end, he's going to record the germination time for each of the seeds. Do we think this is an observational study or is this an experimental study? The question that you always need to ask yourself is whether or not you are controlling an aspect of the situation. Here, we are actually controlling the temperature of the growing stations. We have three, one at 20, one at 15, and the other one at 25 degrees Celsius. So yes, you are setting the temperature up, you are controlling that aspect. So this right here is an example of an experiment. Next, in a study to identify the effectiveness of drugs in reducing smoking habits, the study participants were grouped into 3 categories. Each of the groups was assigned randomly to one type of drug, either drug A, drug B, or drug C. Results were observed for a 4-week period. Is this study an observational or an experimental study? And then if it's an experiment, we're going to talk about the control factor. So again, is there something that it's being controlled? So we have, we are grouping people into 3 categories. So we're controlling the type of drug that each group is taken. So then this is an experiment because we're controlling that factor. The control factor is the drug being administered to each of the groups, right? So it is an experiment, and the control factor is what you are controlling in the study. For in this case, the control factor is the type of drug. If we go back to this one, the control factor in here is the temperature in the growing station for the biology problem. All right, next example says a study was conducted among school students on the relationship between getting up late and getting to school late. Is this an example of an observational study or an experimental study? If it's an experiment, then what is the control factor? So again, we are conducting a survey. We are asking people, did you get up late today? Did you get up late? Did you get late to school? Yes or no? Are we controlling the time they went to bed? Are we controlling how they got to school? Like there is nothing we are controlling here. We're just recording if the person got up late and if that person got late to school. That's it. So because we're not controlling anything, this is not an experiment. This is an observational study. I hope this is helpful understanding the difference between an experiment and an observational study.